Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be talking about adapting to the new normal and having a discussion about some of the findings of our recent survey. My name is Claire Gleghorn. I'm the CEO of Bastion Reputation Management, and joining me today is Rob Mackey, who's a partner at Pitcher Partners, Tristan Sternson, the CEO of ARC Group, and off camera, but very important to the conversation, is Di Gardner, who's the CEO of Bastion Insights, who conducted the research on our behalf. We will have some time for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We're going to keep it as conversational as possible because we've certainly been having lots and lots of conversations behind the scenes gearing up for today about what the future of work will look like and what adapting to the new normal is going to look like. For us, this has been something that we've been monitoring over a long period of time, and the genesis for this study really came out of a lot of consumer style research that was coming out asking people what their preferences were around work. And it occurred to us that that question, when the threat of COVID is outside and the lure of pajamas and a laptop are inside, it's potentially a redundant question. So we decided to flip it on its head and actually do a comparative study between employers and employees and start to look at tracking that a little bit more deeply. Hence why we got in touch with Pitcher Partners and worked with our partners at Bastion Insights. And we've got with us today an expert in the field and a leader of a business in his own right to have a conversation today. So we might get right into it and just recap briefly on the actual findings. So this was part of a series called Adapting to the New Normal that's been running throughout COVID that looked at sentiment analysis. And what we did was extract that and do a special report where we had some additional questions. And then we also engaged with up to 300 businesses around Australia from multiple different industries and different sizes to also do a comparative study with employers as well. So one of the big things that really came out of the study for us was this disconnect that was starting to emerge between employers and employees when it came to expectations around hybrid working arrangements. Now, it must be said that we conducted this study in late November, early December. So in Melbourne, we were all still well and truly in lockdown, and other parts of the country were starting to get into new operating rhythms. For us, this was really about identifying what the single biggest challenge was around working productively, but also making sure we're managing moving into a high performance space. So what we found is that for the most part, workplaces weren't necessarily ready to fully embrace what a hybrid working model would look like. Some had COVID safe plans in place, but not necessarily to the extent needed to really properly understand how it could work in the future. So 1 in 4 of the businesses we spoke to did not have a return to office plan in place. And 39% provided, only 39% had provided additional cybersecurity training, which, given how much we've all had to adapt to operating completely online and remotely and accessing servers online remotely, the technology question is a really big one. We'll touch on it in a moment. The last part there was considering that 40% considered performance management in hybrid models. So one of the things that we found, and we'll go into it in a bit more detail, was this worry about what will happen over the longer term in terms of performance management, productivity, but equally innovation and collaboration. And we're going to spend some time talking about that now. So I'm a facilitator and also part of the conversation today, and I've got an enormous number of views on these things, but I'm going to get Rob and Tristan to speak to some of these. But we've clustered these up under the key themes that we really saw emerging from the findings. So the first one we're going to touch on today is around productivity, innovation, and the role of collaboration. And we'll work through the others as we go. Feel free to take lots of notes. And if you do have questions, pop those into the discussion panel, and we will come to those at the end of the discussion. So I might kick off around this question of productivity, innovation, and the role of collaboration. One of the big clangers, I guess, for me in the study was everyone, there was furious agreement that productivity actually went up during remote working and during COVID. But there was a real sense that the challenge over the long term was around managing performance, but also equally the potential for productivity to drop off and sense of isolation and to kick in as well. So I might just kick off with you, Tristan, to start with. What was your experience of productivity and how would you define it? Has that changed for you over the course of the last few months?
Yeah, I think right at the beginning we were almost thrust into it. So you had to work out how to be productive very quickly. And, as a technology company, a lot of the stuff we do, it's very easy or good to do in isolation to some extent where you're coding or you're building something. But that part of the job you can always do, whether it's in the office or somewhere else. The productivity part where we really got to really quickly was around being able to collaborate and meet with people through social chat channels like Slack, or whether we use Team or Zooms and stuff like that. So initially it was great. We adopted it really quickly. And then over time you start getting past well, actually, is it as as effective when the Wi-Fi drops out, and you lose it here or there, or the mute button. I think we said before the joke of 2020 is you're on mute. Well, that's not acceptable when you're in a conversation, because if you're in a meeting room, you can't do that. So productivity was really high. Our staff think it's extremely high still, but there's a collaboration component of it, which for us, things like daily stand-ups and stuff, they work well to some extent. Sometimes they don't, but it's just adapting to the new way of doing it. Like what happens, initially was great offline, but now some people online, some people offline. How does that work? It doesn't work as well productively. So there's a combination there.
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a moment, because a lot of people talked about the lack of disruption, but jury's out for me on whether those disruptions actually lead to better outcomes. But Rob, I might go to you on this. In terms of how we measure productivity, I think it's traditionally been about measures of output, but do you think that needs to change over time and businesses need to look differently about what they mean by productivity?
I think, thanks, Claire. I do think that it is more than just the quantity of output. It's the quality of that output as well. I think the challenge in that productivity conversation is different businesses that are doing, their workers that have worked from home are doing quite different activities, and it's easier in some work environments or some roles and functions people undertake to measure that and be able to monitor the success, whereas other sort of roles can be a lot more difficult. I think, I agree with Tristan's point. We were thrust into it, and I think there was a lot of nervousness probably in our experience at the beginning. But then, because there weren't other interruptions or other distractions at home, perhaps other than, children, if you had a young family and you're trying to homeschool, productivity did improve. I think the challenge around productivity moving forward is in this hybrid model where you don't have everybody either at home or in an office, but you've got a mix. And so looking at that productivity where you're trying to measure people moving between both of those working models, I think that's really the challenge that we've got moving forward. How do we start to work with that? And I do think we're going to need to look at that productivity in a different way.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and something that came up in the survey. Isolation and collaboration are both seen as potential collateral damage, I guess, or within a hybrid working model. So offsetting that focused, quiet work at home can actually start to lead to isolation. Yeah. For me, I think one of the other elements to that is the little side conversations that happen in the office. Those things that feel like a disruption or an interruption can actually trigger innovation and creativity and lead to better output. So I'm curious, Tristan, in your example, given you work in the innovation space, how you're looking at starting to manage that, where you've got teams in hybrid working spaces in and out of the office and at home.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. How do you replicate the water cooler or the coffee machine conversation? And initially, as we were thrust into it, it was like, okay, well, every conversation needs to be on Slack so you can see the person, or on Teams so you can see the person, as opposed to just pick up the mobile phone. And then you kind of become a bit lazy and you decide, actually, I need some fresh air. So everything goes back to the phone and you're walking up and down the street and stuff happens. But those side conversations, and we've tried it as hard as we can, they just don't happen as often because you physically need to bump into someone to make that happen. And I give this example where I was up in, fortunately, at the end of last year, I was up in Brisbane, and someone was working on a project for us with a big mining company. And she said to me, it'd be really great if I could, have two of me. And I'm like, well, why can't you? Looking at Isolator, we don't have anyone else available. I said, yeah, I can get you someone and hire him in tomorrow. And we did that. And all of a sudden, her productivity doubled because she's now training a junior person up in a particular area. Those conversations just don't happen because, it depends on how big your team is. You're not meeting with everyone all the time. You're not bumping into people. And you have to think about the conversation because you're reaching out to someone on it. It's not an incidental conversation. But you can get around that to some extent as well. So we do things like we did lunch roulette, where you would you basically randomly choose a few people in certain teams, and you'd all sit on Zoom and you'd have lunch, and someone would order you an Uber Eats, and within some confines and stuff, and it was quite fun. But we try to replicate that conversation because if you don't have them, you don't know what you're missing out on. And when we're thrust into it, we're going to make it happen. But over time, you have to. The only other thing I'll put in there as well, just to your isolation point, everyone thinks that everyone's an individual as a different scenario. Like we have people from living in a 1-bedroom apartment to people with family of 5 or 6 kids in the house, and the different scenarios and different ways of dealing with things, and everyone's individually got to be considered, and how are they going to be? So people can be more productive in the quiet or with people around, and people need certain different environments. So I think that's important too to consider.
Yeah, Tristan, I agree. We had similar experiences and challenges. To me, the overarching theme in this area is the need for the organisation, the management, the leadership to be flexible. Yeah, we had the same challenge of how do you replicate the water cooler. We sort of came up with this e-coffees idea, and you'd randomly pick somebody each day to have a 15-minute coffee with. And you're right, those things worked for a period, but because they were, in some ways, you were trying to sort of simulate or emulate it, or not force it upon people, but it wasn't coming naturally. They petered out over time.
I think, Rob, to that point, it's a really interesting one, and one I touched on in the blog recently around rigid flexibility makes an oxymoron out of all of us, because rigid approaches to how you manage flexible or hybrid working, to your point, Tristan, doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So Rob, have you seen that evolve with your clients over time as well? So that what worked at the start of COVID when everyone was in lockdown versus what works now, which is a different conversation around performance and productivity, has that shifted?
Without a doubt. I think it's just been such a constant changing environment in terms of, from a management and a leadership point of view with your own team, and then the way you engaged, or the way we've had to engage with our clients. And that's why I use that term of flexibility, because, as quickly as you thought you've worked out what the new norm is, it changed. I think even as recent as, 5 days ago, we thought all of that was behind us. And all of a sudden, we have this new lockdown that's only going to last 5 days, which is a lot better than, 10 or 12 weeks, without a doubt. But it was, so how much do I go back to a lockdown mode in my business, and the way because some of those things take time to implement with clients and start to change and get engaged different ways, move meetings you might have already had face-to-face again. Now do I move them out and do that virtually, or do I wait a week? And so it is extremely disruptive, and you've just got to bring a new level of tolerance and flexibility in terms of the way you I think approach your clients and your team.
Rob, that was a beautiful segue to move on to the next theme, which is around operating rhythms, and something that has really kind of played with me, and I think underpins this whole conversation, is how we move from a discussion around coping with COVID and how do we cope as businesses and survive through COVID, and set up structures and technologies and operating rhythms that are all around managing a health pandemic, and start to shift the conversation into is this actually just, we need to build this into our new operating rhythms for the long term and look at how we can thrive in that environment? So I'm interested, Tristan, from your perspective, in terms of looking at technology, how that can underpin a new kind of way of working. You know, this is the future of work, it's here. In many ways, COVID has been a catalyst and not necessarily part of the ongoing equation. But how has that started you thinking about what businesses might need to consider around their own technologies and operating rhythms, given that's your area of expertise?
Yeah, I think we looked at technology as a company and a lot of our customers as well as an enterprise thing. So if you think about it, you go into a boardroom and you've got a big camera and a big screen and all that. And now we need to think about technology as an individual thing. And then in a hybrid environment, how do we combine the individual and the enterprise? So I've just said before, I came out of a board meeting where we've got some people on Zoom, on Teams, and some people in the boardroom. And it doesn't work as well. And we have to compartmentalize and work out how to do that. And also the productivity software as well around it. So how do you do daily stand-ups when you're not standing in front of, literally, you're not standing up, right? In front of a whiteboard or a screen or something like that. How do you do that online? And how do people get equally heard? And I liken it back to one of my kids who was in grade 3 last year. And she performed better over Zoom at school than she did in the classroom because she's a little bit shy. And the reason for that is she got an equal chance to contribute. So she didn't have to put her hand up as much and be dominated by other personalities. We've got to think about that in the workforce as well, because technology really can help with that. So there'll be certain people that will shine through technology that hadn't before and get their voice a bit more heard, because you can cut down people a lot easier in a conversation when you can hit the mute button on them and someone else can talk than you can in a real open situation. But then the hybrid components of that need to come into it. So we all moved, we saw Zoom have a really big up spike last year, and then all of a sudden we're working out, well, which are the best technologies, which operate better with bandwidth and stuff like that, which interact. I don't know how many people knew about Mural or Muriel. What's the other one? Anyway, Mural, those technologies at the beginning of last year, but now we all use them for collaborative workshops. There's a heap of stuff out there. It's working out what works for individuals and enterprise together is really important. And that's what we're finding.
Yeah. And from a consulting point of view, Rob, how have you had to adapt as a consultant, actually offering practices and supporting businesses? Because in many respects, and I've certainly seen it in our world as well, we were building the plane and taking off at the same time because we were all experiencing that same level of change. So what are your observations on that?
Yeah, they're varied. You're right. You were sort of feeling like you were building the plane as you took off. How is this going to work? Especially that level of client engagement. I actually found personally, and others in the team, it was almost easier to engage with clients directly because they didn't have all of the other typical interruptions in their day, or a day of meetings that they might have been sitting in face to face. And so I was actually able to engage with our clients far easier through this, certainly in the early stages. And I think, though, as time went on, people then got so fatigued with having to engage through the technology that even if they were available, it was like, I just can't do another Zoom call with somebody. And I found that, again, it came back to us having to be able to be flexible and adapt. I found as we've come back into this hybrid model, people have really looked forward to meeting face to face, to say hello to clients and or us as somebody providing support to them, to do it face to face again, and found that really refreshing. I found since Christmas, there were a few of our clients wanting to catch up face to face. So it really has again changed. I feel the other comment that I wanted to make around operating rhythm was, I think in terms of that mind shift that we need to take, I think there were periods early on last year where we felt we were trying to cope with this environment so we could survive this thing. I think the big shift people need to make, and I've seen some already made it, but I think there are still people feeling that I can't wait until we get back to a more normal model of working. And so they're sort of allowing the current to be very much just roll on, I react to the things that happen there. And I think those organisations that are really going to thrive and actually be successful through this have to move their mind to how do I, which a lot of business would have been doing prior to this, how do I make my business the best I possibly can right now? And how do I, as a leader of the business, actually take this situation and be proactive around the way we're going to engage differently, the way we're going to continue to grow a business if you're in a growth phase, innovate and grab it by the horns. And then I think you look at the challenges that are presented to you in a different way than if you're just sitting, waiting, hoping that you can weather the storm and react to the problems. So I think it's a real opportunity for great leaders and good leaders to think about this in a proactive way. And I've seen with clients, those that are doing that are the ones that are getting the opportunities and have actually prospered through this period.
Can I add to that, Rob? I think that's really important. We learned a lot of really good things around how to manage with people and our staff during this period and our clients. And we don't want to go back to the original world because we'll lose a lot of those good things that we learned. We want to take the best things out of the working from home. We want to advance them and we want to be able to bring them into the workforce. Like, when you meet with a customer, I'm sure, when we did as well, it's a more personal conversation, but it's also we were trying to keep them to less than an hour because a Zoom call on an hour means you click out of one, you click into the next one. And you forget that when you walk from a meeting room to another meeting room or a client to another client site, you get a 5-minute break, you get a breather, right? So how do you get that time in it? Because that was the fatigue behind it. And and respecting people's time as well. You tend to respect people's time a lot more when you're going back to back on these things. So there's some really good some good practices we got out of it. It's really imperative to kind of keep them going as we move forward.
Yep. And I think it's the people that are approaching, sorry, Claire, the people that are approaching it that way proactively are the ones we're seeing out there that are really, they're benefiting from this. They're not, yes, it might be impacting their business, but they're taking it and really learning from it and growing and developing the way they go and do things.
It's a really good point, and one that I keep referring to it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy. And we were at the start of COVID, we were way down the bottom. We were in safety and shelter mode, and we were all experiencing that at the same time. So not just in terms of as business leaders and looking straight ahead and looking at a forecast and looking at those types of conversations and how do you get a team through this, but equally as individuals, we were all experiencing some form of grief or trauma or anxiety and watching what was going on and constantly consuming that. And I think it's pretty much the only time in our living memory where we've been able to have that level of connection with other people. And so your sense of empathy goes up dramatically on the back of that because you're connecting in new ways. And I think that goes to not just relying on the technologies, but thinking about the operating rhythms and the cadences that tap into that. I think that comment about cutting meetings short, I'm going to adopt that, Tristan. So getting to the 55-minute mark and cutting the Zoom short, because it's so true. You end up just going from one to the other and you can't actually operate at your best. I think that leads on really nicely to the next theme, and it's one that I think leaders, I think, are starting to turn their heads to. This is actually a real opportunity, and we can potentially come out of this thriving and change the way we're operating and change the way we work, and in some respects even change what we do and how we do it as an organization. But that's a big shift in mindset for a lot of people, not just managers and leaders, but also for employees as well, and shifting into that sense of trust, empowerment, and also accountability, because we've built a lot of lessons over years and years and years of management around that task orientation. So how do you bring your teams along that conversation? How do you make them feel more accountable, make them understand that they've got a lot more autonomy now, but equally that comes with a changed level of responsibility and a changed way that you look at performance as well? Open to either of you.
I think a really important part around this is engagement with your staff, with your clients, because the reality is we don't really know what will work best. We've all got our thoughts and ideas, but if we, I think a lot of this, in the same way we've experienced in the last 12 months, often we've had to try things and adjust. My view is that the best thing we can do moving forward is engage with the people, try different ways, and, if you like, discover the better way to work in a collaborative way. And I think if we do that, we'll be able to address what I think this survey's identified as a gap in perception. To me, it's a classic change management exercise that we need to be dealing with here. Understanding what's driving both of those differing views, but then sit down and have a conversation about that and work out how we can address the needs of both parties in this new model of that level of flexibility, where people are going to want to be able to work from home and or from an office, and that will vary depending on the function, the client interaction, the individual's needs, and we need to be able to bring that level of flexibility to the conversation. That's my sort of take on this piece in terms of where we're at.
Yeah, I would add, I agree entirely with that. And I think when you look at it, it's kind of, there's a trust element of it, and people are accountable to do a role. What we found is we have to be a little bit more definitional, to some right word, as to what we do. And we follow a method called Scale Up, and we love Jim Collins and people like that. And we look at things like coming up with scorecards and being really specific around what you do. So it's a little bit more binary. Am I performing or am I not performing? And that could be, here are the 5 things you get paid to do. And let's just have a scorecard against it. And that way, you achieve it, we achieve it. I mean, one of our big areas is data and analytics, so we like the data behind things. But then it becomes, we trust you on this. Just go do your task, and you'll achieve these, because we've kind of said that's how it's going to work. And that's been a lot easier to do in this environment, because we can do that, and we can have access to the tools and get people to kind of help collaborate to do that together, as opposed to kind of what we have, which was kind of a little bit more subjective in the past, which was very much, you're sitting with a team, your team lead tells us how you're performing, and we know subjectively if you're doing well or you're not. This kind of becomes a bit more, there's a bit more objectiveness to it and how we measure and stuff like that, which is good. And we can do that, right? And but with the ability to be in a hybrid environment, I think also people are more willing to, our staff are definitely wanting to demonstrate what they're doing a lot more. And that's not because they don't think we trust them, or because it's just because we're not with them every day, right? And we can't see that. But with that also comes call out if you need, some help and advancement, because it's easy to kind of sit there and not ask for help when you're not around. And part of every organization is career development and progression. You've got to be able to get to that, but you just need people to call out so that it doesn't come a performance issue later. So there's a lot of things, moving parts in it, but I actually find it's definitely a way to do it a lot better, and you can use technology to help with that as well.
Yeah, I think that for me, the connective tissue between what we identified in the study as the big gap that's starting to emerge, and that gap is the sense of isolation that staff feel, and that the intention may be exactly what you said there, that the manager feels that we've set the tasks and I trust you to get them done, and so isn't necessarily checking in. But equally, managers concerned over the long term about the challenge of performance management. Now, if there isn't that level of communication engagement, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it gets worse and worse over time. I had on the back of some of the early media interviews we did around this study, someone reached out to me completely out of the blue. She was in her 70s, a healthcare worker. She'd been sent home early on in COVID to work from home and didn't hear from her manager for 12 weeks, which was incredibly debilitating for her. She wrote to me personally to say that she felt really isolated and ultimately resigned and then has retired from the workforce, and feels like that wasn't the way she wanted to end what was a pretty outstanding career. I'm keen to get your thoughts on that as well, because there can tend to be, particularly if you've got teams in and out, that out of sight, out of mind can creep in if we don't think about changing our management styles as well. Any thoughts on that from either of you?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think so often in the conversations or the commentary I've seen around this topic in the media, unfortunately, people point to the employee. And yet I think there's a really important role and change in thinking that's required by the management that are managing those individuals. And they need to, they need a much higher, I think, level of engagement moving forward to ensure those people, if they are working from home or they're not working together with that manager, anywhere near as much, that those expectations are clear, ability to Tristan's point, use technology to give visibility of where I'm at in the progress of what I'm doing. Using tools like that and techniques, I think, become really important. So I think there's a big obligation on organisations to think about what they want their managers to do differently, as much as they're thinking, how will my employee want to work differently and how will I support that?
There's also a level in there around capacity as well. So we look at it and we say, well, we've had to reshape the way that we do people management in our organisation, because easily a line manager, a team lead, a manager, a career manager can grow their portfolio of people. And I remember back into days in the consulting world years ago where we had a capacity of 3 to 4 people you could people manage at a time, so you could spend enough time with them. And we have blown out to 15, 20. And then when it's over, when you're remotely working, you're not going to connect in with them as much. So we've had to go back to, kind of first principles on that and say, how many people can you effectively manage effectively? So that you have that relationship with them, you're able to talk to them. And also the management style of it as well. It's not a line manager, I'm here to just kind of check you're doing the right thing. It's how do I actually get back to the coaching and development side of things? And because a lot of that is lost in this remote world, because you don't hear about the guy 2 desks down from you who's doing a Google certification on something, and then you want that opportunity because you're not getting that. We've got to make sure that we're surfacing that to them all the time as well. Because apart from just the performance side of it, if you're not growing their career, at some stage it's going to stagnate and you need to get moving with skills and stuff like that as well. So I think it's that personal touch and getting down to kind of a more more concentrated approach to management to some extent.
Yep. It's another beautiful segue. We keep doing that throughout this session. So well done, panelists. To the last part of the conversation, which I actually think is the most important, and we've touched on it a little bit. It's been a bit of a theme throughout the discussion so far around the role of culture and leadership. And what I said at the start of the presentation that prompted us to undertake this study was because there are a lot of surveys that were just asking workers, what's your preference? And it didn't actually delve any deeper and ask for the rationale why, or ask employers, which I think goes to a sense of readiness as well. And a lot of that starts at leadership level and the culture of an organisation and how ready it is to move from COVID safe into this new way, this future of work. So keen to chat now a little bit about the role of culture and leadership on this. Rob, you spoke about it before around that critical role that leaders play. Keen to hear your thoughts on just how important that culture piece is.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a one piece that I still am grappling with, to be honest. Our organisation has really built a lot of its success around the culture that we've developed. And it's been, it really challenges me as to how we're going to, and that culture has a really strong sense of one firm, caring for our clients, caring for our people. And how we do that in this hybrid world, I think, is the piece that challenges me, because we're going to need to continue to service and support that. Historically, we've been able to do that by the amount of face-to-face interaction we have with our people socially, the activity, the time we spend with our clients. We've got to find new ways to be able to continue to do that. I think we certainly don't feel we've suffered, say, in the last 12 months, because those relationships were already there. But how do you build new relationships? How do you onboard new people into your organisation and then develop that if the new norm in the future is quite a hybrid model of being in and out of an office? So I think it's one of the most important pieces of this whole hybrid challenge moving forward, for organisations to really be able to keep their culture intact when it is an important part of their business. Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet. I think it'll be a number of small things that we need to adjust to ensure that we can continue to support and develop culture.
Is that, from your perspective, Tristan, I think we often think about culture as, the Friday night drinks or the social catch up, and that was identified in the study as something people were missing. But Rob, from what you're saying, and Tristan, keen to get your thoughts, it's about rethinking the way we think about culture, and actually it's around having a culture that is adaptive and flexible and ready to change and ready to take on creative solutions. Tristan, would that equate with where you're thinking?
Yeah, 100%. Our culture is very much based around all of that, plus board night games and board game and table tennis tables and video games. It's really, our office has been our culture, and that's what's been a bit unique about us, and that we have a lot of fun at work, and that's really important. We strive as an organisation to make an impact with digital technology. That's our big thing. So we're making these huge impacts in the market, but we're having fun while we're doing it. And to have people in and out of the office is really hard. So we'll have people, like a couple of weeks ago, someone said, I missed the board game nights. We can't do that if no one's in the office. But how do we do that remotely? And we try to do that through different things. But I think it just needs to be, from our perspective, when people come in the office, we need to really create that culture and create it really quickly. We can't take it for granted. But we also need, and we're getting the opposite, people saying I'm less productive coming into the office because there's so many people to talk to, so many people to catch up with. So maybe that's what it's more like. It's touching base with the head office to some extent, but we need to adapt to how that works. We've just started a graduate program, and we've got 10 graduates who have started. And how do you engage in the culture for people that have never worked before in industry when there's no one else in the office but them, right? So there's a lot of things we're trying to work out. Our onboarding process, we started a lot of staff last year. I think it was 150 people last year. Offsite, we sent them a laptop by Australia Post and maybe a t-shirt, and it was just so fragmented as to how we did it. And how you can adapt to that, it's going to be really hard. And getting them back in, we're re-onboarding everyone to some extent. So it's really hard, but I love the challenge, because I think there's a challenge here and it can be done. And if you do it properly, you can really, in an office, anyone can put a table tennis table in their office and say, we've got a fun culture. But when it's hybrid, you've really got to really live and breathe your culture to make it really work properly, and how you engage with people. And then you'll get people that really want to work for that culture as well, because there's more of an effort two ways on it. You can't just stick a pinball machine in and culture fixed to some extent.
Yep. Yeah, I do think that culture conversation, though, is not only about the team, the people within the organisation. I think most organisations have a culture with their clients. Their client has a perception of how they work. I think that's equally, if not more important, in making sure you can continue to hold that culture together as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also there's elements of it too, like there's a culture of security. And when I think about from our clients, like, how do we provide the most secure data environments or cloud environments and stuff like that? And you're right, with your customers, you've got to be able to maintain that. And that's hard to kind of show when you're hybrid, but being able to kind of show what you're doing that's different, to be able to do that is important, and leading
That's right.
with it as well. So, got to be strong leaders in it. We love it because we can lead our guys, and our guys help us lead, and we're very transparent. And, I get mentored by graduates and they get mentored by me, and it kind of works both ways. It's a really cool environment for doing that. But that's what it is. I think as much as your survey is, it's listening to people, listen to your clients, and then adapt to that. But you can still have your unique culture to it as well that makes you who you are.
Yep.
Yeah, if anything, it's actually really sharpened the conversation around what your culture, values, and leadership attributes are, because you don't have, unless you've got it in the Zoom call behind you, Rob, you no longer have the sense of what makes your culture in terms of your office space and the way that's set up and the aesthetic and everything that would normally add up to give a sense of your culture and your brand and your values. So it really is just about the words, how you show up, how you present every day, and the emphasis on leaders to drive that change and drive that sense of optimism is writ large.
Yep.
I'm conscious that we've been speaking now for 40 minutes, and we are happy to throw open to questions. So I guess just on that piece around culture and leadership as well, specifically, Tristan, is there anything you have noticed around the change in your leadership style over the last 9 months in particular as the head of the company, and how you've had to shift and learn on the job yourself?
Yeah, definitely. We're a very transparent organisation, and we did that in the office through being open. So anyone can walk past my desk and hear me on a conversation to a client or a staff, whatever. And that's, and talking financials and stuff like that. Our CFO walk behind his desk. I'm not suggesting you go and look at the financials, but you can hear all that. So we had to deliberately make sure that we had vehicles to do that. We have a fortnightly town hall, best attended meeting in our business. We get about 85% of people. And we started off with, this is exactly how the business looks every week and every fortnight. And it's amazing. We've deliberately done that. We went from doing that monthly, or it's actually quarterly a couple of years ago, to monthly to now fortnightly. And it's just changed the way that we interact with our staff.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions coming in now through the Q&A function. So we've got some there now. The first one is around work from home days. I've got a very firm view on this, but I might throw to the group. What is your view on set work from home days, such as a Tuesday and a Thursday? Rob, did you want to kick off?
Yep. We grappled with this very question, especially when we could only bring 50% of the workforce back in. And because of that, because we needed to manage the amount of workforce, what we did was we set a couple of days for each. We split the group 50-50. We gave them each a couple of days that we wanted them to come in, and then we kept a day free and flexible. Now, if those days weren't going to work for an individual and the other two would work better, we gave them the opportunity to sort of ask to be as part of the other group, and then kept one day flexible. And that so far has worked well.
Tristan, how have you approached it?
Yeah, we're very much the same. We actually, we're lucky that we've got offices around Australia. So in Brisbane, we've probably had more flexibility around this than anywhere else. And we actually did the Tuesday and Thursdays. It seems to be the popular days, I think. But we found that different groups like different days. So we do a lot of project work. So it's our project teams choosing their days. And the challenge being managing with capacity, obviously, as well. But you also need to mix it up a little bit. So you make sure that you've got, it's not just your projects in the office, you've got your operations teams or your sales guys or your executive team and leaders in there as well. So we kind of find that we're making sure that we do, our leaders being more flexible, they're rotating their days more than the project teams, but it's a good way of doing it.
Yep.
We've taken a slightly different approach again, where we've actually really focused in on what is it you need to be doing and where is best to do that. And so really looked at, and we've got the luxury of a space that allows us in terms of capacity to sort of scale up and down. But so we've had people coming in the morning to do a collaboration session, a brainstorm, and then dispersing for the afternoon to work on that. We've actually found that's worked quite well for us. and probably works better for our clients as well, given the unpredictability of our work in that space. So I guess the short answer is ask staff, be really clear on what the needs of your business are, and build and adapt and be ready to change at a moment's notice. Yep. There's a question here around software tools. So I was wondering about software tools that might be available to monitor staff productivity without logging time, etc. So professional workers would not be happy with this sort of tracking. It's a conversation that's come up a few times, and certainly in the IR and workplace law space are starting to grapple with some of these conversations. But are there tools that do work, that actually work for employers and staff?
It depends on what you're doing. I guess, like, we're as software developers, in a lot of instances, we can just use Jira cards and stuff like that, where we can actually see throughput. That's no different to what we would have used in the past. We just might be able to monitor it a bit more, and defect lists and stuff like that. So there's no real difference in that. We tend to keep a scorecard, and we're starting to we actually use an HR tool we just implemented last week. We use Financial Force on one end, and we use a tool called Elmo, and we're kind of keep scorecards in those tools, and people self-populate them. But we literally have 5 numbers, and that's all you need to. That's kind of your job, and that's what you do, and you self-assess to some extent. But I don't believe in like other monitoring and stuff like that. You kind of cameras on or time cards and stuff like that. It just doesn't make sense. But there's also flexibility as well. So if you're in a task that doesn't need to be 9 to 5, we haven't discussed this yet, and you can do it 6 till 8, 9 to 5, 8 till 4 or whatever it is, then you can do that if you're getting through the workload, which makes it, and it works with your project. So that doesn't always work, from monitoring time.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, Tristan, if it comes back to the nature of the work that the people in the organisation are doing, I agree. If your work is very project based, it becomes easy to use your project management tools with planning that project out. When do I need what done by, as the measure of how successfully then we're getting through the workload.
Yeah.
It's a bit harder if you're not in that sort of scenario. If you're more in a process type role where you've got a task to do in the broader process, but again, you should be able to measure then the throughput of the step that you're responsible for. So I think it's thinking about the role and the function in those ways, and then what sort of tools could be embedded in the process of the project to be able to capture that. But it's not about how many hours did I work. It's about what's the output that's that I've been able to achieve through a period of time.
And that is staff productivity, but what about career development as well? So that's the other thing, because you don't notice that as much, right? Everyone focuses on, did X person do their 7.6 hours and bill this many hours per day and stuff like that. But it's the stuff that's going to future impact you as well, which is around the career development. So using tools to measure that's really important too. Just to see, you've done this number of training modules or something like that are really important.
It's a really good point, and it's around changing the conversation, isn't it, before you think about the tool that you're using. We've got a question here around measuring culture. So how do you start to measure the impact on culture over the long term? And I guess my view on that is around making sure that you're setting the right expectations. We talked a little bit about it during the session, that being really clear around what the actual vision of the organisation is. Are we here to survive this crazy time and hoping to get to the other side of it and back to a normal, or are we embracing it and thinking about how we can completely shift? And I think establishing that as your baseline and understanding and putting in place measurement around that, continuing to check in with your staff, continuing to check in with your leaders as well, because they're really important for modeling the behavior, and making sure that you're in a ready state from my perspective is really important to see what those cultural shifts are over time. I'm not sure if you've got some views on measurement, Rob, in that space.
Yeah, I think you're right. Knowing what the baseline is for everyone first is really important. We use our values to do that. We've done quite independent of COVID. We've done quite some good work around values and making those clear and communicating what they mean. we then use our regular employee satisfaction surveys, and the questions in there check in and provide us sort of quantitative data on a regular basis as to how we're tracking against that. We ran pulse surveys through last year of our staff to see how they felt they were going. So I think that those sort of tools are the sort of things that you can use to continue to check in with your staff, as well as, the broader, more informal. But if you're really wanting some formal data over a long period, I think, surveying your staff becomes a really important part of that.
Yeah, we're exactly the same. I'd just add to that. Also, it's not just about measuring the culture and the impact on it. We also look at how it can measure health and wellness too. So how do you?
We do as well.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah,
do that just by a Slack bot.
Yeah, I think the important thing as well is that additional overlay from a health and wellbeing point of view of the rationale for how people are doing may have nothing to do with what's going on at work. There's so much else swirling around at the moment. It's a really important consideration. We've got here, so a general rule of thumb has been a 70-20-10 learning and development rule where majority of L&D is on the job. Tristan, I think this is a question for you. Some interactions with others and only 10% formal and set exercises. How will this change in a post-COVID workplace era?
Yeah, I don't know. I won't talk to the ratios, but I don't know. Like, learning on the job is really important. We're trying to teach graduates at the moment, which is really hard. And I think you still can. And I just think it's just how you focus the time to do that. So you can't sit next to someone and teach them how to do a particular task if you're not with them, but you can be on a Slack or a Teams or something like that. And I actually think it can make it a bit easier because you don't have the distraction around you of other people walking past and asking questions. And typically the person who's training you might be someone who someone else is asking questions of as well. So yeah, I don't think it changes much. I actually think it can help a little bit and allows you to kind of spend a bit more time just really focused on a learning activity. But you do have to get people together on those certain days and times so that people can be working with each other, because there's certain things you just can't learn. And you can learn a technical task. You can't learn how to communicate with a stakeholder when you don't see someone communicating with a stakeholder, for example, or how to interact with a client if you don't see someone interacting with a client.
Yeah, I agree, Tristan. I think you've got to really, we adopt that 70-20-10 philosophy in the way we go about our training. And yeah, we had 70 grads join the organisation 2 weeks before lockdown 1. So it was really, really challenging for us. But I think the technology does allow you and enable you to collaborate with those new staff members, and also, to your point, take them along, even if it is a Zoom call, when you're having that call with the client, so they do see how you interact with that client. So it's, I agree with you. I think it's doing it differently. It's not that you shouldn't do it or we should change that mix, because they still need to be able to, the best way to learn is by watching and working with other people.
We did a lot more case studies post projects as well to extend that learning and ask those questions of senior leaders, which was really important. We've got another question here that speaks to it worked really well when everyone was at home, worked really well when everyone was in the office. How do we, I guess, avoid the A team, B team split? And that particularly when we're looking at people who are preferencing wanting to work from home more regularly for personal reasons, who may start to feel excluded from the office where everyone's getting along and laughing and having a good time and heading out for drinks together.
It's a huge challenge. It's even just trying to have a stand up where 2 people are offline and everyone else is standing in front of a monitor. It's really, really hard. Technology will play a big part in that, but I think some common scheduling and common sense in that too as well. So we talked about Tuesday, Thursdays, or how you schedule people to be together, regular touch bases. And we would never, I don't think we will ever move to, as a business, to 100% remote where people don't interact with people. and it's making sure you make the most of those. So we started doing what we call a back to base day for certain teams. So before we even kind of got back to the regular working day, so you just kind of get everyone together for 2 hours in a way where they can interact. But that's one way, the personal side of it. But the inclusiveness, you don't want to exclude anyone, and it's going to be a technology challenge, but there's also the interaction challenge as well. It's not to forget of that. And the A and B teams, I think, it's a rotation. It's mixing it up a little bit too.
Yep. Yeah, I think that I agree, Tristan. I think it's about making sure that there is some time that everyone is in the office. Not all of the time, but it's getting that blend so that you don't end up with this A team, B team, because I think it is a real challenge that we will have moving forward. I read a really great article yesterday out of the London Times, and they were taking a very much sort of legal industrial relations view of it, and were sort of putting the position forward. They thought there was going to be a lot of claims and cases that will arise as a result of this, where people are treated the wrong way. And I just don't think we can't afford to do that, I don't think, moving forward.
It's a really important point, and I think it goes back to the survey around that gap that exists between that sense of isolation and that worry about performance management, and what we do to try and close that to avoid those situations. We've got one more question, which was really around the effectiveness of different types of tools to engage online. I think right up the top, Tristan, you mentioned Mural. Are there others that spring to mind that have worked really well for you and Rob in your team too?
Happy to take that first. I think number one is obviously whatever chat you use and keep it consistent on it. So we're a Microsoft internal house with Office 365 and stuff. So we use Teams and we also use Slack. We find it, the key things. But Mural, there's another one that sounds similar. The other one is Trello. We've always used that in the past and has been really useful. We just found it a bit more useful now, just to be able to share boards or any of the Confluence or Jira tools. The Atlassian tools have been really helpful in that too. But you find the ones that kind of work for you. It's like everyone always asks, which is the best one for video conferencing? It's the one that your business can interact with the best. It's not Zoom, it's not Teams, it's not Google Hangouts. It's whichever one works for you, or WebEx. It's whatever works for you. So plenty of tools out there, but the main one that we found that we hadn't used before was Mural, and Miro just been a godsend for us around workshopping.
Yep. Yeah, I've probably got a similar view, Tristan. I think often it's to do with the sort of what the business does and who they interact with, some of their suppliers. In the development space, I agree, often using a lot of other tools. I mean, we're a big Microsoft shop. We use the Office 365 environment. We transitioned from Skype for Business to Teams as our telephony through the middle of this. And that's meant that everything telephony and all of the chat and collaboration happens in one space. We use Planner for, as opposed to Trello. It works well because it's really well integrated. I think that, but that's because it works for us. That doesn't mean it won't work for others.
And equally, we've adapted a lot of the tools that we would normally use in facilitating workshops and strategy sessions with clients, which were once upon a time whiteboards and butcher's paper and sticky notes, which are actually really good interactive facilitation tools. A lot of that we've moved online and are able to get equally rich content and discussions going in sessions held across multiple states, where you're using things like Mentimeter and polls within presentation tools and other things like virtual whiteboards as well, where it doesn't just feel like a presentation and you can actually get really good interaction. So thinking a little bit laterally about what is it you're trying to achieve, to your point, Tristan, what are we trying to achieve, and let's find the tool that helps us do that.
It goes that one really quick thing. At the beginning of the work from home, we had our business coach for Scale Up say to us, we can't do these workshops, they're impossible, you have to be in person. And we're now a year in and we're saying we can't do these in person, we have to do it. It's much more interactive, which is quite funny.
Yep.
That's a fantastic note to end a conversation around adapting to the new normal on. Thank you very much. Thank you to Rob and Tristan for your comments today. Thank you to all your questions, and to Pitcher Partners for hosting today's webinar. We really appreciate it. We're hoping to come back with a bigger and better study, so watch this space, because this thing is not going away, and if anything, it's just going to get more interesting and complex as we move through this. So thanks very much everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy everyone in Melbourne who's out of lockdown. Congratulations, and stay safe and well. Thanks all.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Claire. Cheers.
Thanks, Tristan.